Welcome to the Psych Ward Podcast, where we have conversations with everyday people about men. We believe that every man has an authentic version of himself, so we're on a mission. And that mission is to find an answer to one question. What does it mean to be a man? Welcome back to the Psych Ward Podcast, where we have real conversations about men with men. I am Eric Ward, and because he refuses to go away, along with me is my co-host, Mike Lucas.
Hey.
Michael, how are you?
I'm still here.
Yeah, despite my best efforts, whatever. Today, we're going to delve into a topic that might make some people uncomfortable, but I'm not really sure we care. Some people are going to get uncomfortable because they think it's morally wrong. Others because they secretly participate in it and don't want anybody to know. Whatever the reasons, our conversation tonight is about an issue that has historically been a somewhat taboo subject. We are going to talk about the sex trade, and in particular, men who pay for sex. There was a survey performed by the National Opinion Research Center that showed that 14% of American men have, at some point in their lives, paid for sex. This study in particular focused more on men who hired escorts or sex partners via an online source, as opposed to men who are kind of driving the streets looking to pick somebody up on a street corner in the quote, bad part of town. Survey reported that the average John or client doesn't look all that different, really, from men who have never paid for sex. They are more likely to have served in the military, only slightly less likely to be married and white, and slightly more likely to have a full-time job and be sexually liberal. But he said that the majority of them earn over $120,000 a year, and they typically have graduate degrees. They also, as a side note, think about sex more than the average man, and interestingly, don't really feel guilty about that. Up to this point in the Psych Ward Podcast, you've heard us interview a variety of different men, always with one question in mind: what does it mean to be a real man? Today, however, we are going to deviate a little bit. We have with us tonight our first female guest. It is our pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Ibi. Ibi, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Well, hello. I guess I'm a trailblazer here. I'm the first woman to show up and make it to the podcast. So I broke that ceiling. Take that, Kamala.
That's right. Funny.
Well, I'm Ibi. I'm a sex worker. I live, work, do everything here in Chicago. I could get more detail, but they give me money. I have sex with them, and your description of the average client looks like is completely spot on. And I don't know. This is maybe it's probably because I'm a little bit older and I'm a little bit pricier, but I tend to see more lawyers than. I see very few military, but I see a lot of attorneys. That's my robustly researched opinion on, who it is.
I think when I started doing some research for this podcast topic, I came across your name a couple of times, a couple of different articles that had been written in the media, and it was more focused on early in the COVID pandemic, kind of how it hit the sex worker trade pretty hard. And how all of you had to be pretty creative, I guess, to find different ways to make money. And it kind of sent you online. And I think part of the reason that I reached out to you in particular was just you have some history as an author and as well as a podcaster. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I write. I have a site where I've got some of my work published. Actually, it's mostly essays and narratives about my life as a sex worker, and really kind of my idea was actually to put together these essays and have a story of here's what it's actually like to be a suburban woman who's just people don't look at me and think oh, hooker, but here I am. And my life is very dichotomous and very weird, and it's wonderful, and it's crazy, and it's hectic, and it's everything. But I really wanted to humanize the story of being a sex worker, because I'm a recovering addict, and I'm I'm a mom, and I'm, just kind of living in the suburbs. Like, I'm a single mom trying to like get my kids, through everything. And like, I couldn't hide what I was doing either. So they were pretty young when they figured out what I did. And then they're just like, I mean, my younger one was just like, well, you have to have sex to have a baby, and having a baby is a job. So I don't understand why it's illegal. And I was like, that is an excellent point. So, yeah. So
you used an interesting word.
Dichotomy. Oh, no, I was just going to say, so the idea was to like tell these stories and like humanize both the every side of the transaction, and also just, the everyday life, and like, that my life can be boring and dumb. And I've got like rabbits running around my house, and then I got dildos on the table, and then I go to work, and it's a very different experience than I think most people imagine it being.
Yeah. You said dichotomous. I'm curious about what that looks like, other than the rabbits and the normalcy of all of that. But is your life like kind of divided into two very separate and distinct kind of parts of you, or is there some overlap?
Well, I mean, I think that there's like me, and then there's like this very curated version of me that shows up at work. I think that's true for everybody. Like, we don't show up and, like, sure. Oh, I didn't shower in 3 days, and I'm still in my slippers, and, I'm like just eating beef jerky.
Don't show up to work like that, right?
No, they did. Yeah. They're like, I thought you were going to like have brushed your teeth. And I'm like, no, no, it's extra. Yeah, I think that it's very like my life is so really just boring. Like, I don't do anything exciting. When people ask me what I do, I still to this day don't have an answer for like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, I don't know. I
go home.
Yeah. Like, I nap, nap. Sometimes I order snacks. And that's about it. I'm really good at snacks, really good at it. And so, but like, it's really, you just think that like, oh, she's a drug addict and a hooker. And like, I'm like, yeah, I go to work and I come home, and, then I sit on my computer, even when it's like not broken. I sit down on my computer like all day and night. And it's, that's like my day to day. And then like my work it's probably less exciting than people think, but it's also, it's more human than I think people expect it to be. I think people expect it to be very transactional and like cold and like kind of, and it's really, really not at all like that. I mean, yeah, it can be, and those are very unpleasant encounters, and don't enjoy those. But and then I have like one client that he throws parties, and like I help him run the parties, and like. So we're like in this giant hotel suite, and I've got like a room full of hookers, and I'm like, okay. And we're just going to go from like 10 o'clock at night until the sun comes up, and I get back on a plane. I like my plane will land wherever we are. Like, my plane will land at like 6, 7 o'clock, and like by 7 o'clock a.m., 7 a.m., I'm back on a flight back to Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy. And like, that is crazy.
Where do you fly? What kinds of places have you been?
I'm wondering like how much I should like say like legally. Well, it's the major cities. I think Vegas is one of them. New York, U.S. Yeah, yeah.
How about outside?
Not outside. No, I think that's maybe a bit risky. Yeah.
What percentage of your clients are like regulars?
I'd say most of them. I think it's hard to say, because the ones that don't come back, I kind of just forget about them. But they usually do come back. I have a fairly good base of men and they're great. Like, they're great, and I really I think highly of most of them. Like, I mean, like, quite highly of most of them. So, which I think would surprise people too.
It's interesting because you and I scheduled this episode a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that conversation kind of shocked me because one of the things that you said was, oh, summer is a good time for us because it's really slow. And I said, well, why is it slow? And you said, oh, because most of our clients are on vacations with their wives and families. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. And it led to, for me in my head, this whole string of questions, like, who are these men? And I think I and Mike and I both have quite a few questions, but I think I just want to throw it to you first. And can you just kind of tell us in general, who are these men and how do they come into contact with you?
You want names and everything?
No, I don't want names. Just the lawyers.
Yeah,
just the lawyers' names.
Just the lawyers. There is, I was surprised, when I started doing this about 10 years ago, that there really isn't like a subset. Like the demographic is like men, mm-hmm. men who, have enough money in their pockets to pay for what they want. And so that is, I've seen priests, I've seen rabbis, I've seen, administrators from schools. I've seen, they're mostly married. And I think that surprises people because when somebody is single and they like want to hook up with somebody, they can just go and do it. And they don't have to worry about like their wife finding it.
Right.
So one of the things that I'm paid to do is like, the door closes and I don't exist in your life anymore. Like we're strangers until you come back. And like, if you never reach out to me again, then, I'm just a ghost. I don't, I feel like when I say that it's really sad, but it sounds sad, but it's not. It's like, oh, that's, my job is to like make sure that your life is safe. And I felt like your life is in danger, but like your life, your way of life, your home, your family, and like the way that you go about your day.
Have you ever run into your clients outside of a session with you, like just out in public? I
actually, I was surprised to find out that once I did, and he messaged me like a couple days later. He was like, I saw you at Nordstrom, and
he knew not to say anything.
Yeah, I knew not to say anything. So I'm just telling you now. Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I always say it's like HIPAA. We're HIPAA compliant.
It's funny you say that because as you were talking about, kind of the door closing and that relationship doesn't exist outside of that first meet them, every time we get a new therapy client and we have to give them kind of our new client spiel, right? So we cover all the legalities, the HIPAA, the confidentiality, the privacy. And one of the things I always do is I point to my license hanging on the wall and I tell people I worked really hard for that and I would like to keep it. And what that means is I don't know you unless you sign a piece of paper saying that I can tell somebody that I've met you, talk about you, et cetera. And I use the example of, hey, if we run into each other in the grocery store, I'm going to walk right past you and not acknowledge you because I don't want to put you in an awkward position of having to explain to whoever you're with, oh, that's my therapist. Now, if you come and talk to me, of course, I'll talk to you. I'll be friendly. But it sounds as odd as it feels and sounds to say it. It's very similar.
It's very similar. Yeah. Huh. I mean, I would also prefer they don't come up to me because then I have to, you don't know who I'm with. And like, I don't want to have to explain,
right.
who,
Yeah. Awkward.
I mean, I'm not a closeted, but I mean, you're with a family member or you're like with a friend and they're like, oh, did you, that guy? Oh, come on. I don't want to think about it.
Judge you.
He better have a lot of money looking like that.
EB mentioned that it's a very human relationship. Same with therapy, counseling. Even though they're paying us to be their therapist, it's a very human connection. So actually, I think that's a good parallel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to get uncomfortable with this conversation, Mike.
Why so?
I don't know. Just wasn't expecting to sit here trying to figure out how my profession compares with EB's, but it does.
Well, yeah.
Well, it's funny because, like, there's a lot of girls that'll be like, we're therapists. I'm like, okay, we're not therapists. Like, therapy is hard work, and it's sometimes painful, and there's a lot of crying involved. And like, if that's the way it is, like, you're doing it wrong. Like, so like, it can be, it can be self-care, it can be therapeutic, but I am not a therapist. Like, you're not going to heal by seeing me. You're just gonna, you might be a little bit like slightly lighter than you were when you showed up. little fluid.
So where do men find you?
On the internet.
Typically.
Yeah, there's some websites that have ads, and they go and they browse the selection of available women that are just, they're just waiting to meet you online. They're horny and waiting to meet you.
And what's the average time between contacting an escort and meeting them face to face?
It varies. It varies a lot. Like, I will get guys that, be like, can I see you like right now? And I'll be like, well, I need like 2 hours. And they're like, wait, no, I don't have that kind of time. Like, I'm like, well, okay, but like, I have to get dressed, and then I got to like go to the place where we're going to meet. So like, I need a little bit of time to get ready and then get there. I can't change the way that time works.
So do you see people at your house, or you always meet them somewhere else?
No, I have spaces that I meet them at, because I don't have a nice enough place. It's full of buddies. It's no, there's dildos on the table.
So right as we were getting started, you mentioned that you are married.
Mm-hmm.
That surprised me as well. I think. How does your husband manage what you do for a living?
It was funny because I was doing this before I met him, so there was no like question of like should I, shouldn't I? I was like, well, this is what I do. This is how I make my living. This is I have a career here, and it's what I do. So if you're cool with that, then you're cool with it. And he, and he knew, and he was, but then like, once we started dating, it was a little bit hard for him to kind of like deal. It was a little hard, and I get it. And we really went through some rough nights of like, talking about like really just getting into the like nitty gritty. And one of the reasons I married him is it was always so respectful. Like it was like, we can be mad, but like not mad at each other. And he was really good at having that conversation, even though like it came to the point that I was like, we've been having this conversation too long. Like, you got to get over it, because I can't do something else. This is what I do. And now he's, he helps me get ready. He like, he'll come and he'll help, if I'm, going to my own space, then he'll help me set up. If I'm going to, a hotel, he'll be like, do you want to ride? And, he's very supportive. And the thing is, like, more than anything, he just wants me to succeed. And, he thinks that, I'm good at what I do. And, and people think that like means like, oh, I'm really good, I'm good at that. But, like, I mean, yeah, I am, because but there's a lot more to it. I mean, it's still not to be like, oh, it's not about the sex. It is definitely about the sex. It's always about the sex, but like the sex is more than just intercourse, there's a whole experience around it that is also sex.
And I think that's one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about is I guess it's maybe a two-part thing. One is the time that these men spend with you. Obviously, there's the sexual activity that happens, but I'm guessing that there's more than that. It's not like they walk through the door and everybody takes their clothes off and 5 minutes later they're on their way out. But also, I think just I'm curious about the relationships. Are these men who think that they're in a relationship with you? Are they in love with you? Are they like, what is their perspective, I guess, of the relationship they have with you?
I mean, I would say that they do have a relationship with me. It's not, necessarily a traditional, like, romantic, by the book kind of relationship, but we do have a relationship. And, and it's, I think it's really important to have like some kind of like connection with somebody that you're about to like, you're engaging in like an illegal act with a total stranger, and you're doing it naked. Like, you have to have like a level of comfort with them. So I usually start out my sessions, like, they'll show up and I'll get them some water, and then we'll have like some really awkward conversation to make it more comfortable. And I'm like, how about we just, and then, so but you know, it's different with everybody, but it's an awkward date, but there's the understanding of like where things are going to, there's no game about like, oh, I wonder if she's gonna, and I wonder if I should act like and you know, like, oh, I have to pay like coy. And like, I don't do this. I'm like, I do this. Like, that's what the money's for. You know, that's what I do. And like, we're going like, as long as you're
the nature of the relationship.
Yeah. Like and as long as you want it, like, and they always do. As long as like, that's what you want, like you're going to get it by the end of your session. Like, it's guaranteed. I'm a sure thing, like every time.
So how long do they typically schedule with you?
About an hour, you know, an hour to 90 minutes is kind of a typical session.
Okay.
And most guys can't go more than once. So, you know, there's more, and, you know, there's more involved in that. And that, you know, you have to, there's a physical like touch, you know, and, you know, just being with somebody, but, you know, just feeling like you're connected to somebody and feeling that you're liked. And, you know, I think like my goal is like always to just like make my client, like, one, I want him to think he's a sex god, and I want him to feel like, you know, he's like, he should feel like the greatest person. Like, that's my job. It's like, you want to be the greatest person today. Okay, then you're the greatest person. And if you want to be a shitty person, like, I'm not going to do that. Like, you can't do that around me. You can't be a shitty person.
See, Eric, it's just like therapy.
It is. You have to go. You're being inappropriate. I'm sorry. Great. So do you see much violence?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I guess I don't know like what much is anymore, but you know, one of my first sessions, you know, when I first got it started, I was still like in my, you know, addiction. I was drinking a lot, and I was high, and I got kidnapped, and it was like one of my first clients, like for like second, third, maybe. So, and yeah, that was unpleasant. He wanted to kill me. It was a very, dramatic kind of escape, but
How did you get out of it?
I kept waking up, and I didn't know like how long it had been since the last time I woke up. I just kept waking up and just like not knowing where I was, and like just I was like disoriented, even like the room didn't make sense, and and so at one point I woke up and I realized that my phone was near me, and I couldn't tell you like where it was. Like, I want to say it was like on the nightstand, but you know, I have no sense of that. So I grabbed my phone and I was just like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And I went to the bathroom and I barricaded myself. Like I threw like all my weight against the door, and I just started texting people my location. Like, cause you know, on your phone, you could just text, like drop a pin. And so, you know, I started texting my friends, and they just like started replying with the same thing. Like they started just sending me their location. I'm like, no, I'm like, I need help.
I'm not asking. I'm telling.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you're at the park. Now, I'm not at the park.
Wow.
So scary. that was an ugly night. And you know, actually when the police showed up, and I was just talking about this earlier today too, and but the police showed up, and I was the one that was, you know, detained. Yeah.
Oh. You took a ride.
Well, they took me to the hospital and told me like I had to get examined, and they didn't actually examine me. And I had like an armed police officer standing outside like my little ER bed, and they wouldn't let me have like an advocate. And I was like, no, I know I can have an advocate. And they're like, no, you can't have anybody. And, you know, we don't have time to, we'll get to you when we have time. And I was like, okay, this guy just tried to murder me. And like, now I'm like waiting to be arrested. And it turned out they didn't have enough, so they had to let me go. But it was, like I knew it was illegal and I knew it was dangerous, but it just really opened my eyes to like how easy it was for him. Like it wasn't like he was after me. It was just like, he was just looking for like a girl. And, you know, I don't know if it was a plan or not, but he was like, all right, you know, I'm just going to take her. And he, told my ex-husband that like if they came looking for me, they'd never find my body. And so that was early on, and I really really didn't do okay with that. So I wasn't really working after that. But then when I got sober, I was like, maybe I could like go back and do this. So I was like, 2-3 weeks sober, and like my ex-husband was like, yeah, go ahead. That's a great idea. And somehow, it did work out for me, once I got sober, I really, there's been danger, nothing like that. And there's violence. Like we're not people that are, respected in society, and a lot of times we're not people in society. We're things. We're problems. And really like, not treating us badly is kind of a benefit because it makes us go away, and it teaches us lessons, and we're just whores, so it doesn't matter what happens to us.
So less than human.
Yeah, there's actually when police will find a girl's body, and they know that she's a sex worker, it can be labeled NHI, which is no humans involved, and they just close the case.
Wow. Oh, that's dark.
It is. And, every year we have a vigil on December 17th, it's global. That's our day, the National Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. And we honor like all of the girls and boys, everyone who fell that year, like all of our fallen. And, it's most of us are killed by clients, police, or spouses, or, intimate partners.
Mm. What's the date of that? December 17th? December 17th.
Is there some significance behind that date?
I'm sure there is. Like everything we do is usually linked to something. It always has some kind of significance, and we're very it's a culture that's very connected to, or parts of like the community are very like in tune and like aware of like our history and like our place and our status and like how we've gotten where we've gotten, and the stories of people don't tell you the stories of like what like hookers of yore did, but the hookers were the first people that voted, or first women to vote in the United States. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And actually it was Wyoming that got the first women's vote. And so they said they weren't going to join the United States unless their women were allowed to vote, because the women were all the business owners. And because, you had all these guys coming through, gold miners, and there were no girls, and they were really looking for, they were desperate at that point. Like the boys were having a rough time just being like all guys and mining. And so they would pay to see like a pair of panties. So like women came in and they started like running their sex work businesses, and they built schools and libraries, and they started workman's comp, and they built Wyoming for the thriving mecca that it is now. But yeah, and so they were the only, they were the most powerful people in Wyoming. So they were like, we should vote. We should have a vote. And it was hard to tell them no, because they owned everything.
That's something.
There's a ranch of some sort. Is that out in, I can't think of the name.
There's
Bunny Ranch?
Well, like in Nevada, yeah, there's the Bunny Ranch.
Is that still around?
As far as I know.
Yeah, it's like the one county in the country that legalized prostitution, I think.
And it's very strict. Like it's not decriminalized, and there's a very big difference. And it's a very strict, very locked down thing. And I know that everyone's like, well, yeah, because you have to like, you don't want them to like be spreading diseases. And it's like, well, people are having sex not for money all over the place. And like, we didn't start it and we didn't finish. We're not going to be like we're not like default carrying all of this like disease, and we're not like giving everybody like leprosy and everything.
So I had a client once who was a former sex worker, and she also had done several pornographic movies. Is that a common thing in the trade?
It depends. A lot. And when I say girls, like I'm speaking because my community is girls, and men have a very, very different experience as providers in this industry. So I really like, I'm speaking on behalf of like my people so when I say girls, like I'm not excluding guys, I'm just really talking about like us, but there's a lot of girls really, really want to protect their anonymity, because there is no, like, once you're out as a sex worker, there's no walking that back, that will be held over your head for the rest of your life in some way or another. There will always be somebody that's going to be willing to weaponize that. And, if you want to have a career doing something else, and most people do, because they don't think that they can do this forever. And, I've been doing this forever. So
it turns out you can.
You can. Yeah. Not that it's not offensive that they'll ask me, like, what, are you thinking about like retiring? I'm like, you can't, like, you can't do this. Like, how old? I'm like, well, like, how old are you going to be when you stop having sex? Because then that's a good age for me to, I feel like I can quit at that same age then. Like, guys just quit. They just quit. They're just like, oh, I'm old.
I mean, there's old men. Maybe your clientele changes a little.
It will, but it always does. It's evolving, and who I appeal to and who anyone appeals to. What appeals to anybody is also it also evolves, and like some people stick around for 10 years, and some people see it once, maybe twice, and that's it. So
yeah. So you said there's no stereotypical client. I think one of the questions that I wanted to ask is, what's the most common thing you hear from the men that you see?
Well, they all tell me that I'm very pretty, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to stop you. Like I know, but like, go on. You can tell me again. Like I can hear it. I'm okay with it.
It's always good for the ego.
Yeah. I don't think it's what's a normal conversation with a guy in general? Like, you've talked to a lot of guys. Is there anything that they just like always bring up?
They're not getting enough sex.
Yeah, that's.
So I kind of specialize in marriage therapy, and it is a common theme. I think I would say probably 80 to 90% of the couples that I see, there is almost always a complaint about not enough sex in the relationship, and
always from the guy.
Always from the guy. I have yet to hear a wife or a female partner complain that there's not enough sex. And I know what happens. I think I just haven't seen one of those couples. And it's interesting because, after you and I talked and you said that bit about like, oh, my clients are all on vacation with their families, I started comparing notes in my head to all of these couples that I see. And I guess I was less shocked, after thinking about all these couples that I see and these men and their complaints that there is no sex in my marriage. There, if I do, I have to beg for it, or, she doesn't do any of the things that I want to do, or, she's not adventurous. She lays there. She doesn't really make me feel attractive. It's like a chore, all the usual kinds of things that I think we hear men in general complain about, but maybe particularly in marriage therapy. Do you think that's part of the reason they come to you?
One thing I've found is that there's a surprising number of guys that will see me, like, because they're not having enough sex, but like the rest of the relationship is pretty good, and it's like it's not worth all that other stuff, and the other stuff is like great. I mean, a lot of them I hear a lot that I love my wife, like my wife's great. I've had guys like tell me like my wife is one of the most incredible people I've ever known, and they really like they can, and it was definitely an adjustment for me to like hear that, be like, what do you mean like your wife's incredible, and like what are you doing with me? But it's like they need that, and physical touch is something that, humans need not everyone's required to provide it for everyone else. So like you have to get it somehow. And it's like, well, if they can, sneak off at lunch and it doesn't, and then like they have that, and, then like all the other stuff that they get from their wife is there. And I know that's a very unsatisfactory answer for a lot of people.
No, I think,
but that's reality. That's the way that it really works.
It seems like in general, men, if they're having sex with their wives, it's like a separate entity in itself versus all the other things their wives do for them. For some reason, they can separate that and go to see an escort or get sex somewhere else and still maintain that they love their wives. Whereas I don't know if women are the same in that sense. Sex seems to be just one piece of the relationship that is sort of in with everything else, whereas men kind of have two separate parts of the relationship.
Yeah. And, it's also interesting because, there's this, like, there's also like, oh, like they're having sex with their wives, but like they want to do like something like dirty. Like they can't do that. Like, I can't do that. She's my wife. I love her. Like she's like, like a person. Like, and so it's like they come and that's, they can't like look at this like woman that is like, the love of their life and be like, yeah, I want to pee on you, and nobody pees on me. I don't let anybody, but I mean, like, you can't like that's dirty. I don't want to do that with my wife, as my wife's not that kind of girl.
Right. What's the most common thing, I guess, that men ask for from you?
Anal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anal. Yeah. I mean, well, and I kind of I was like, when early on, I was like, how do I just like make it to like, that's what I do? And I was like, I don't think I can just advertise that.
Turns out you can.
Turns out I can just advertise that. I can just be like, you know what? I do butt stuff. And so if you want to do the butt stuff, your wife probably doesn't do the butt stuff. So I do.
Do men bring you gifts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Frequently or?
It's occasional. I mean, and it's not expected at all. Like, I feel like I charge enough money that you don't like, I don't expect tips. I don't expect gifts, but they appreciate what we do.
All right. I wasn't going to ask, but now you brought it up and I'm going to ask, how much do you charge them?
$600 an hour.
Okay. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot of money.
That's not like therapy, Eric.
Yeah, I don't make that much an hour.
Yeah, but they can't take it out of their FSA either,
That's true. Insurance doesn't cover you.
Yeah, I do not take Blue Cross. They've been a nightmare every time I've tried to bill them. So
it's funny. So what's the most expensive gift they've ever brought you?
So I own about at least 40 pairs of Louboutins, which, those are, that is a down payment on, I guess they're they're shoes. They're expensive shoes. They have the red sole.
Okay. I didn't know what you were talking about. Apparently Mike does, because
the red bottom shoes, they're so sexy, but yeah, they are. I was a shoe girl before this, so like it just made sense that I would have to do this. 'Cause I'm like, that's how you get the shoes. But at one point I thought I was like looking at the Louboutin website and I was like, I'm never going to own a pair. I'm just never. And I was like, oh, I was in tears. I was like, I'm just never going to own a pair. And they're so beautiful. And I've got 40 pairs. Like I've got them like in places that I don't even, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I had these.
How much do they cost?
They're about $1,000 a pair, give or take. Yeah.
So men bring you that on top of the money they pay you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh my.
And then, I've had, and then I've had like, some more like elaborate gifts. Like I had a family vacation, but that, that's something that I would say is very rare and very special and like not something that like happens to most girls. And I am so grateful that I was able to have that, Yeah.
So you paid for your family to go on vacation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How was your husband with that?
Well, I was not married then. Oh. So
okay. I've
gone through husbands. I've switched him up. I upgraded.
Good.
Yeah, it was, my ex-husband, not so happy about it, but
yeah, well, I was just thinking how that would be kind of difficult for me if one of my wife's clients paid for a vacation. I don't know how I'd feel about that.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to go, but it would feel kind of awkward.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. I guess, I mean, I kind of expect that there's a different attitude, like, because these things are going to happen. So you kind of have to like deal with the fact that like another man's going to buy me Louboutins. Are you going to be cool with that? Because otherwise you're buying the Louboutins.
It's funny that part doesn't bother me. It's like the vacation. I don't know why. It's I'm making a distinction between those two.
Well, I think it's it's an experience, and like you don't want to like sponsored by Jeff,
Sponsored.
So I guess, Eby, one of my questions, do your clients ever tell you that they're in love with you?
Yeah.
How often?
And I'd say, well, they don't usually say it. And they avoid saying it, but you can tell. And I think that it happens more often than people expect it to. I mean, everyone thinks that they're going to do this and it's just going to be like, well, yeah, I'm seeing her because I want to take care of this need. I have an urge and I can, and I'm going to. But you build a bond, and I mean, there's not another relationship that you're going to have that's going to be like the one that you have with, the girls that you see. It's something different. And it's something that doesn't exist outside of this world, and yeah, they do fall in love with, the girls that they see. And I feel like my job is to make that safe. So like, if they fall in love with me, that's okay. They can have that feeling and they can be in love with me, and, I can let them love me while I'm there, and that's what they feel and that's what they need. And I also don't let that bleed over into the rest of their life. And, and then like I stay away. And so, and it's my job to make sure that that boundary stays, firm, so that they don't go destroying their life because I didn't protect them,
I guess that doesn't surprise me. When you think about the physical closeness that comes with sex, and I don't. It's interesting because I've known people in my personal life who've ended up with let's call them a sex only friend in their lives, and they always say like, oh, it's just for sex. We're not dating, we're not in a relationship, we're not anything. And invariably, every time I've ever heard someone talk about that, one or both of them end up having these really strong emotional feelings for each other. And I think it's part of the way that we're designed. That sex is sort of the culmination, or maybe the creation or combination of the two of our intimate feelings for each other. I think it's really hard to make it just about sex. I don't know that we were made that way.
No, I mean, I know, my thought is that like sex isn't just about like everything around sex is sex. And like, we reduce it to just like intercourse, but it's all of the other stuff that you do around it. It's like when they walk in the door, like that's where the sex begins. And, it can be like, well, I just want to have a lot of conversation. But the conversation is important for the kind of sex that you want to, that's part of like your sexual experience. So like, and I do think that, people need to have a connection for the sex to be like really good. I mean, you can have like hot, like, I just met this person, but I mean, is it going to be like great sex? It's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting sex, but and then like you're with this person who's like, you're naked and you're sweaty and you're literally inside of her body, and there's nothing more vulnerable than that. And like, like I said before, like you're also committing a crime together, and, you both have everything on the line. So, there's a lot more than going on that I think people realize. And yeah, you have to build a trust, and you have the oxytocin and all of that. And
you mentioned earlier that you do parties sometimes.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Or you host them. Tell us about that.
Well, I started hosting them like on my own. Like I would having like another girl or a couple other girls, and then we'd have a group of guys, and they would come and see us. But I have a client that actually I have a couple of clients but one of them is very regular. We have these parties, and it's like we get a bunch of people, and we I show up earlier in the night and then set everything up, and we have this like huge, I have 250 pound, or no, I have two 70 pound bags because I can just check them when I fly first. So they just get in there. So, and like, it's always like this like, it's this like challenge for me to like get everything balanced so that they both are under 70 pounds. And that's like it's all gear. It's all toys and clothes and, supplies. And it's funny because I'll like roll in and I'll be like, oh, like, where are you from? And I'm like, when we're downtown in Chicago, I'll be like, oh, I'm coming from, where are you coming from? Oh, Evanston, it's like
exotic.
Like, isn't that like 10 minutes from here? Like, how long are you here for? Like, oh, I'm
right.
Like, I'm not even staying. I'm like, I'm leaving. Like, I'm just hanging out for the night. But yeah, so it's like, we'll start and like, we'll have like a group of people, maybe like 4 or something, and then send them off and then bring in new people and send them off and then bring in and sometimes we call them back and sometimes we call in new people, and it's, you never know, but that's it. That's also a rare experience, but that is fun. And, the people that are good at that they're really amazing people. And I
what makes someone good at it?
I think it's an energy. Like you have to, you have to be enthusiastic. You have, if at any point your client thinks that you're not having fun, it's not going to be fun for them. It's like they need you to like be having fun. It's nobody wants to be like, well, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody because there's definitely people, but nobody wants to be having sex with somebody who's just like, yeah, I'm here for the money. Like you want them to be like excited to like be with you, and that's one of the things that you're paying for. And so it just, it feels bad to like hire somebody and then like be like, oh, I don't think they really want to be doing this, especially in this line of work, because there's a lot of feelings about like being exploited. So it's like, oh, what have I done? It's
like paying a therapist that doesn't like you. Why do we keep coming back to these comparisons between our professions? I'm not sure why.
And I've had therapists that didn't like me, and I wouldn't want to have sex with them. So
it's interesting, that study that I referenced earlier. There were a couple of other things that they talked about. A lot of men apparently who come to see someone like you refer to themselves as hobbyists.
That is gross. It's a gross term. Like, I'm a human. I'm not a hobby. Like, your hobby isn't having sex with random women, like, who do it for a living. Like, right. It's not a hobby. That's like trains, collecting trains. That's a hobby. Trading baseball cards. It's a hobby. Fantasy football, a hobby.
Right.
Like, paying girls to have sex with you, not a hobby. I mean, there's no skill to it.
It's a relatively disrespectful term, I think, but those same men are the ones, at least in this particular study, that said that they would be perfectly happy marrying a prostitute. And they also said that they believe that prostitutes almost always really enjoy their work. And so you talk about dichotomies, like we referenced earlier. It's an odd sort of belief system, I guess, for some of these men. And I think the more I thought about this conversation that we're having, I just kept coming back to, like, what an odd thing to be married and then paying for sex and, in some ways using women, but then forming these kind of relationships with them. Like, none of it matches up in my head.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm just going to say that the term prostitute is actually a bit disparaging, because prostitution is a crime. And, so that's why we say sex workers, because, like, it's just like referring to us by what we would be charged with if we were arrested.
Sure.
So, yeah. So sex workers or like providers or escorts are fine, or like goddesses is good too. That's really good. And like, here, have some money is also good. But when I started doing this, I was very turned off by men that they're all married. Like, there's very few single guys, because very few single guys need the discretion of like a professional. They're all married. I'm like, and I liked them. I liked them so much. I'm like, these are guys I really enjoy. Like, I could see myself like hanging out, being friends with them, dating them. They're really like, I like these guys, and I would never suspect that they would be somebody who would cheat on their wives. And it really shook the foundation of like how I understood and trusted men. It was very weird to be like, but you love her. Like, why are you here? It bothered me. Maybe I'm just more jaded now, but it's reality. And like, I'm not the one making them cheat on their wives. I'm just, and then, what you do, like your relationship with your wife is not my business. And I will never ask.
I was going to ask you about how your views of men have changed since you started this line of work.
I mean, I think I'm even still, I'm a very like naive and trusting person. How do I know what to trust? And it's everybody. And it's, really fantastic husbands are out there, seeing providers. And sometimes it actually like, and I'm not saying like we're out here saving marriages, like you guys aren't either, but we're also really, the goal isn't to necessarily stay together, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Not always.
Like, maybe it's better, that you're not. And that's fine,
Mm-hmm. But
I mean, I'm not out here saving marriages, but like, if like that, if getting that handled is going to make you a better husband, handle it. I'm skeptical that it does, but
yeah,
but that's not my business. Like, I'm not here for that. I'm like here to provide one particular service. And I doubt that my ass is like saving marriages, but
I wonder what it is about attorneys that makes that the most popular group.
I think it's the money and the long hours and the stress. And, I think that working that much is isolating. And, they also have the means, they have enough money that, that they make, so they have more disposable income. So
that's insightful, though, that the long hours, the stress, the alone time, it just kind of lends itself to that kind of thing.
And what's interesting is very few doctors, very few. And my theory, and based on like absolutely no information whatsoever, my guess is that they just don't want to like blow off steam like with enough like people's bodies, like they have enough of that. And I think that they think they're just I think they've had enough of like touching people.
Yeah. So a proctologist is not going to come for anal.
Probably not. I've never seen one, so
that's funny. It's interesting because you think about sex for men in particular being more about a physical release than it is for women, and I think that's part of what makes sense. I've written a couple of books, and one of them there was this chapter about kind of how men view sex and differently from women. And I know that men have this reputation of being non-romantic, and especially when it comes to the act of sex. But what the research really says is that men can be just as romantic and have just as intimate an approach to sex as women, but it looks different for men. And the actual act of sex, I think for women the average woman tends to be much more intimate than it is for men. Whereas for us, it's just that release piece. And so that's part of the reason, kind of like Mike is saying, it doesn't surprise me to hear that you're seeing a bunch of men who are under high stress jobs and not going home until late at night, even if some nights they don't go home, but needing some sort of an outlet, I guess, physically and sexually and maybe even emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like, they come in with a need, and it's more than a release. Like, the release is important, but they do have this, like, they want to feel like they're really attractive. They want to feel like they're really good at sex. They want to feel like sex gods, and they want to feel like they are like charming and handsome, and like they can like woo women. And and I don't think that I don't think people like realize that, or women realize that about men. And I think that men think we're complicated. I don't think we're that complicated, but when for men, sex is almost always going to end with an orgasm. Like, women, we may go years, like it may be a long time before we have one. So, sex has to be about something more than the release, because,
right.
usually end up with partners that don't give that to us.
Right.
Are most of your clients in good shape? Or do you see a variety of body styles and that kind of thing? Or is
they're all afraid that like I am like all my other clients are like Ken dolls, and I'm like, no, you're Ken off, like you're. They're all. I mean, there's
a variety.
Everybody. I mean, I feel like, you know, I wish that more. I think heavier guys tend to not see girls as often because I think they're just. I assume that they are more self-conscious.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't think there's a way to be wrong about having a body. So, you know, like
I go to my chiropractor and they offer massages, and I always feel like I should apologize when I take my shirt off. I'm so sorry.
And I always, you know, they do, and I'm like, and I'm always like, I always tell them like, you're not allowed to apologize, like for coming with the body that you have. Like you couldn't, like, what are you going to do? Not have that? Like that's your body. That's the only one you're going to get. So like, you're not going to apologize to me for it. Like, cause I'm not going to forgive you. Like I have nothing to forgive you for.
But do you get that quite a bit?
Yeah.
Guys who are kind of embarrassed or
I'm so sorry. Yeah. I know that I'm a little like a lot of them do. It's funny because they're scared to show up too. Cause they're like, I know I'm probably not as good looking as the rest of your clients. Like it's like all like it's like Models Inc. and then like Joe. It's yeah.
Well, I think they're also maybe holding themselves up to your standards. You're an attractive, thin woman, and you know, I mean, that for me would be even harder.
Yeah, and there is as you know, I actually used to be like quite. I was about 300 pounds, so like I know that like you know it can be very intimidating to like be with somebody who's you know attractive. Like
yeah.
You know, I understand that mentality, and you know.
Cool.
So, Ibi, what else do you want us or anybody who might happen to accidentally come across this and listen to it? What do you want us to know about you, about your profession, about your clients?
I really like. I think the most important thing and the hardest thing is to like really see us as people who are worthy of respect and like who are doing a job that is dignified and it's an honest job. Like I'm, you know, it's thought of as like dishonest, but really it's like, I'm going to tell you straight up, like, this is what I'm offering. If you want it, this is what it costs. If you don't want it, you don't have to have it. Like it's, you know, there's no wheeling and dealing. There's no like, you know, slipping and like, there's no fine print. There's just like, do you want it or not? And I don't think that I could work in another industry because like it's not that honest out there. Like I like things to be very like, okay, this is I know exactly what to expect, and like I know you're not lying, and yeah, I know you're not like saying this because you're going to sell me that, and it's very, very honest, you know, and we're not the cause of, you know, infidelity. We didn't invent it. It was, you know, born out of a need. And, you know, we're not trying to ruin your lives. We're not trying to ruin your marriages. We're not homewreckers. We're actually like, I'm pretty intent on like not wrecking homes. Like I don't like that.
I guess what keeps running through my head is you're not calling them.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they're calling you.
Yeah. And I never call them, you know, except for like the yearly telethon, and we do that.
December 17th.
Yeah, December 18th. Like, you know, like December 17th, where they cry, and the next day we're like, all right, let's ruin all the homes. Also, like sex workers are spanning like all the demographics, you know. So, I mean, one of the reasons that I feel like it's important for people to look at me like I am a junkie hooker. Like that's what I am. And so, like when you're talking about that, like that's me. You know, I'm a real person, and I'm really. I guess I do stand out in public, but because I'm walking around like 6-inch red bottoms and, you know, and like red lipstick, but I'm a real suburban person. Like, you know, I have a regular life. I have rabbits and I have bills to pay and I have dishes piling up and I have a normal life and I'm a normal person and I'm just as worthy of respect, even just not derision and like jokes about me being dead is like the punchline.
I live in a very probably more toward the conservative side, a suburb. And we live right across the street from the local grade school. I'm looking out my window right now. I can see it. And there was about a year-long period where there was a girl in the school, and the mom would come to all of the events. I mean, she showed up every time, whether it was parent-teacher conferences or performances or whatever. But she always came dressed in a way that certainly got the men's attention while she was there. It was very, very, very what you would probably call inappropriate for a school setting. Of course, it didn't stop most of the men from looking. And what was really interesting was she ran a daycare during the day. So people would pay her to watch little kids. And then when the daycare closed, turns out, we found out later, she was running, I don't know what the right term is, a brothel maybe, out of her house. So she went from daycare, and she had girls that would come to the house and see clients there in the home with their kids in the home. And then in the morning, she would get up and be a daycare again, and eventually got busted. But it was always kind of shocking to me that, like, this is right around the corner from my house, and here's this person. And I wanted to think poorly of her, right? Single mom, and, how dare she, and how could she? And then I think, like, all right, I may not agree with that second job that she had. It may not be, what I think she should be doing, but it's certainly not my place to make that call, and not my place to judge her. But at the same time, she was doing what she thought she needed to do, I guess, to pay the bills. And so I always come back to, trying not to be that judgmental person, trying not to, assume that I know what's going on with somebody in their life and what they need. And, it was hard because my daughter, one of my daughters had become friends with her daughter and was over at their house. And funny story, that was the first time my daughter ever tried Red Bull, and apparently had like 6 or 8 of them at the age of like 8.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, she came home just buzzing. We're like, what happened to you? Oh, her mom gave us a new drink. I never heard of it before. It's something called Red Bull. I'm like, oh.
Red Bull or something?
Red Bull. Yeah, she said it much faster than that. And we're like, well, maybe you shouldn't go over there. She should come here. But
did you take her pulse, like 120?
No, I don't think we could have caught her to hold her down long enough.
I understand why it's frowned upon to be like running a brothel at a daycare. But, one, people are having sex in like the same building as kids all the time, as long as they're not like exposing the kids. And 2, it's probably very safe. Like, people are not going to be beating up girls or like pulling any kind of like shenanigans, with a daycare downstairs. So it's a very safe place for the girls to work too.
How often do you worry about the legal part of this, if ever?
It's illegal. So I don't, like there's always a chance that something's going to happen. But, I feel like most of the time when they're busting girls, it's for a show. It's they're like, oh, we're saving all these sex trafficking victims, and they're not sex trafficking victims. They're just people trying to work, and, and they're not saving anybody. They're arresting them. And, and they like to do it in like they like to get a big haul of people.
With their pictures in.
Yeah. And so they want it to be like a big bust, and it's not worth their time to like go around driving around being like, are you in this hotel room seeing this guy? And
right.
So I'm not super worried about it. I have a family member that's a vice cop in Chicago. So it's funny to just like, I might be sitting next to him at Christmas, just like, hey, what's up?
So it's illegal, but you have a website that is very specific about what you do.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that try to like skate that. They're like, well, I didn't say explicitly. I'm like, yeah, but like you do. I mean, we know nobody's going to your site being like, I wonder what you do during that hour that you have time together and doing whatever consenting adults choose to do. We all know. And like, if you're going to get arrested and they look at your site, they're not going to be like, I don't know, it's plausible that she was just selling time. Like nobody's buying time from anybody else. Like they're like expecting a service or a goods or something.
Right. Well, Mike, I don't have anything else. Do you?
No, but man, informative. Very interesting.
It is.
I'm glad.
It is. I don't know that we've answered our question, like what it means to be a real man, but I think I have a much, although Evie, we've decided we're never going to get an answer to that question. We're just going to keep interviewing people. But I certainly have a better view of kind of who comes to see you and what the experience is like and why they come. And we appreciate that. So,
well, thank you so much. And I mean, I'm glad to have like trailblazed here and just been the first woman on the men's podcast. And
hey, go big or go home, right?
Absolutely. I'm Wyoming over here.
That's right. Well, Evie, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Michael, I always ask you the same question at the end. What particular insights are you taking away from today?
Well, I think it was interesting to hear kind of the type of, I didn't know it was mostly lawyers. That's interesting to know.
Well, disproportionately lawyers. I wouldn't say it's like 90% lawyers. It's just
yeah. So I like your analysis of maybe why. And I think you did a good job of promoting the human aspect of this, where, people that don't do this, I've never paid for sex, so I have no idea how it works. We have an imagination of kind of like first time, kind of is this weird, scary little event, just from watching it in movies and that kind of thing. So,
I mean, movies are usually just absolutely accurate. Porn is the only genre that is like a little bit like fantastical. So,
right. Speaking of movies, Pretty Woman was the first time I ever heard of like an escort type of situation. So it's interesting to hear kind of how that all works. So I would appreciate you being on. This was just fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate.
No, we really, really want to thank you for being here. So until next time, Michael, Evie, thank you both for being here. Everybody take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.